Welcome to the School Turnaround Podcast. My name is Dr. Chance Lewis, and I want to welcome everyone to today's episode, an episode I'm really excited about. Have a very special guest that is with us today. But before I introduce her, I just want to tell all of our listeners about the School Turnaround Podcast. We focus on schools across the country that have been identified by some as low performing or not meeting expectations. I always frame it as a lot of missed opportunities from the system. And that's why we are here to talk about solutions through the work that I've been able to do. The magnitude of the issue that we find is that in every state across the country, there are in the range of 300 to 500 schools that have been deemed low performing, where if their state does letter grades, it's a letter grade of D or F, or if they're in a numbered system below 60 by that state's metrics. So the whole focus of the School Turnaround Podcast is really to talk about solutions to provide great opportunities for students to go to a high achieving school to get all the possibilities that they can out of their education. So we have a number of stakeholders who join us on the podcast, from teachers to principals to administrators. We've had mayors on the podcast, and today we have our first school board member as well. So I want to introduce today our very special guest. We have Dr. Charlitta Hatch. She is a school board member in Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools, newly elected. And the reason why I wanted to bring her in today is to really bring a focus in on the role of school board members in school turnaround. So, Dr. Hatch, if you will be so kind, please introduce yourself to the audience and briefly just share a little bit about your journey, in education leadership and school governance.
Absolutely. So hello, everyone on the School Turnaround Podcast family. Thank you, Dr. Lewis, for having me. I'm so excited to have this conversation today. So I am Dr. Charlitta Hatch, Charlitta from Charlotte, and I am a proud wife to my high school sweetheart. I'm raising the third generation of CMS students in my family. I met my husband in the 10th grade, and we have an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old. And so I always like to start with that because I bring that lens to my work and in the roles that I serve. Over the last 5 years, I have been a doctoral student studying urban education, and where that journey started, I had just written my first children's book and really was thinking about what is my role in helping to change the narrative of Black boys.
Right.
And was really challenged with the question is it just about the book? And that was when I was introduced to you and the urban education program and really started to think about the role of parents and the role of advocacy in the way in which our students navigate through large urban school districts. So a lot of my work has focused on the roles of amplifying parents and advocacy and how they intersect.
Right.
So in the last really 6 weeks, I've been able to now serve the 18th largest school district in the country as our district, one of our district representatives. And so I am excited to really unpack what that means here today.
Okay, great. And in my viewpoint, in knowing you and watching your development and in the school districts I work with across the country, my belief is that school board members in their journey, that there is some kind of epiphany that happens in their journey to make someone want to become a school board member, because there's a political side to it, of course. There's an educational belief side of it as well. So talk a little bit about what motivated you to step into this role at this point in your career. You're a successful person in corporate America as well. So talk a little bit about first what motivated you to step into the role.
So first, you have to think about the landscape of our country right now.
Right.
And so you're sitting here and you're raising your children, you're serving, and you're thinking you're doing all of the right things. And I was also writing my dissertation. And my research was, again, really focused on, how mothers' voices are at the table to make decisions to influence how schools are designed, knowing that Black mothers specifically were not the target market when schools were created. Yet you think about large urban school districts, they're, heavily Black and brown. And so I'm writing these implications, and they're all policy related. It's like, if we could just change this policy, if we could just influence this, procedure, equity audit, then I'm looking and seeing things that we believe are pretty shocking that we wouldn't think would happen in this country today. And you're like, oh, they just do that by just creating a law. You just write an executive order, or the General Assembly will just, pass this or not pass this. And so then you're like, okay, you're advocating, and that's necessary. But if you want it to be sustainable and live beyond you, it has to be a policy. And so it really was this intersection of, watching things happening across the country, seeing if I'm actually living out who I say I am as I'm writing this work, and then seeing it collide. And that is really what propelled me to say, how can I be who I say I am at this point in time in our country if I don't do the hard thing right now? And so that's why I said, if I want to be that change, then I actually have to get a seat at the table.
And that's an important seat at the table. And I really talk about that a lot in the classes I teach and the work that I do. And the thing that really bothers me, which motivated me to get into this work, was just the sheer label when a student goes to an underperforming school. When you put a letter grade like a D on a school, not only do you put it on that school, you put it on that child, you put it on that community as well. So let's get into it and talk a little bit about solutions today. When we think about school board members, many people in the public can't really differentiate between school board members, superintendent, and their particular roles. So talk a little bit from a solution standpoint. How is it the role of a school board member different than a district administrator like a superintendent versus a school principal as it influences school turnaround?
I love this question because I'm actually learning this now. And it's one of those things where you think you know what the job is till you get in the seat. So in our large urban school district, we are part of what's called the Council for Great City Schools. And so they have a governance framework that is called Student Outcomes Focused Governance. And so what they have found through their research is that a lot of times school board members spend a lot of time talking about operational things when really the framework should be about students. And so what we have learned is student outcomes don't change until adult behaviors change. So the board is focused on students. The administration, the superintendent, is focused on adults.
Got it.
And so we have to challenge ourselves to say,
clear point.
Are we talking about students or are we talking about adults? And what the board is charged to do is to set aggressive enough goals that would incent adult behaviors to change without making them so unobtainable that you deflate adults are saying this is so completely unachievable.
And that's interesting. I never heard it framed that way in the work that we're doing. And so if the board is focused on students, superintendent's focused on more of adult behaviors. So then what is the responsibility then of the school board in helping shape some of those conditions, for that school turnaround to happen?
Yes. And so we have to think about what is it when we represent the community's values and voice. So we are the representation for that. And so when we set these goals, we have to also set what's called guardrails, which are things that we cannot allow the superintendent to forsake. So for example, in achieving this early literacy goal, you cannot then therefore not keep kids safe. You can not allow teachers to be developed. You cannot be inequitable in the way in which you execute these things. So the culture is set by the guardrails that the board establishes. But while we establish the what, it is the superintendent's job to establish the how. And that's where I think it gets really confusing for the community and for families, because if, as the board, we dictate how, then who are we evaluating? Are we evaluating the superintendent, or are we evaluating ourselves?
Right. Wow, and that's key. So it's so nuanced, and so hopefully for our audience, we can kind of bring some clarity to it. So in the work that I do, in one of my publications, we highlighted that a student in the urban school environment can go from their kindergarten through 12th grade career, and they may have an average of 4 superintendents during that time. So let's talk a little bit about that, but I don't want to talk about the superintendent side. I want to talk about the school board side, right? So on the school board side, we hear cases across the country where sometimes school boards sometimes overstep their boundaries in turnaround efforts. They may have not enough time for a superintendent to make change or building principles. So what do you see from a school board perspective when you kind of look across the country where sometimes school boards fall short when it comes to the school turnaround process?
I think it's falling pressure to the community, which are adults.
Right.
And so I think and I want y'all to hold me accountable to this,
right.
As a school board member, if you are focused on students, you also know that change doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
And that if you enact too much change and too much direction change, and then you're not allowing students to actually learn, get the foundational skills, and to be able to see that growth. Right. I think the community pressure sometimes, when the results don't happen fast enough, you can cave into that. And so our board has committed that we have goals for 3 to 5 years. We monitor those goals every year. And based off the guardrails that we have set, we'll know if we're on or off track. But it is not our plan to change the goals,
right?
Because we want to hold the superintendent to those goals, but we also really want to see the students actually achieve the goals that represent our community's values. So, for example, one of our goals is that every student would leave enrolled, employed, or enlisted, right? So we want people to have a path. It doesn't have to be college. It could be military. It could be a trade, or be employable.
Some pathway,
right? Yeah. Well, that's a great goal, right? But to expect that to happen in the first year is unreasonable, right? And so you have to really be grounded enough to say, like, that is where we're going. That's our North Star. But we're not going to hit that mark year 1, year 2, year 3. And of course, the community is like, why not?
Right.
And so you have to be able to, I think, have the superintendent's back.
Right.
And to block our job is to manage the community.
Right.
And let the superintendent kind of execute on that and give them the space and grace to do it.
So in the spirit of that, then let's talk to school board members across the country, right? So what should be the most important question school board members should be asking when schools are identified as low performing, knowing that community voices are out there? So how should school board members kind of function in that space, and what should they be asking at that time?
So the first thing that I would ask is, are there schools that are not considered low performing in your area? And what resources do they have?
Right.
What opportunities do they have? What is the seniority, the demographics of their educators and staff? And does this quote unquote low performance school have those same resources? And if not, I believe that we should be asking for an equity audit to make sure that we're not just deploying resources equally, we're deploying them equitably. Right. And so that may mean that you should be asking those strategic questions to really uncover and allow the superintendent to potentially see that there may need to be some resource allocations.
Right. And I'm glad you brought up equity, because we know inside of school districts, there's definitely differentiation between the allocation of resources, right? I mean, it happens all across the country. And so if equity is going to be a central piece of school turnaround, how can then boards, school boards, hold superintendents and other stakeholders accountable in facilitating these turnaround efforts around kind of equity-driven versus just kind of compliance-driven situations as well?
Well, and I think to that point, it's a culture.
Yeah.
It's a mindset that you cannot forsake it. And so it is very easy, I think, to be in a very formula. It seems like with schools, it's like, well, if I have this many students, I need this many teachers. And if I have this, then I need that. And so that is the way in which resources are allocated. And I think as a board, it is our responsibility to say, but where is the need? Right? Because not every school needs the exact same thing. And so it is our responsibility to keep that at the forefront. Because if we truly want all students to be able to leave and be enrolled, employed, or enlisted, to be able to read, to be able to be in the right math, then we actually know that different students need different things.
Right. And so I think, especially at this time of year, I mean, we're in December 2025 right now. I think one of the most powerful things that school boards have in front of them is approving budgets. This kind of financial resource allocation. So let's talk about it a little bit so the public can understand the role of the school board. So let's just say a superintendent presents their budget, right, for the next school year or fiscal year or whatever the situation is. Talk about from a school board perspective, how they view that and how they make decisions, ask questions, in the spirit of not only keeping a school district moving forward, but knowing that you have to do school turnaround as part of this kind of budget allocation as well.
So in our situation, we are not a taxing authority. And I think there's a hybrid of some school boards that, are able to tax and some that are not. And so I think the first thing to understand is that our money mostly comes from the state.
Okay.
A small percentage from federal, and then we have a good supplement from our local, which is our county.
Okay.
So our funding sources are limited. So we have fixed capacity of dollars that we work towards. So the first thing I would urge the community to do is to find out who your state representative is and to continue to advocate for an increase in teacher pay. Because we know that if we don't have a good qualified teacher in front of students, then we're already starting behind. So when you start to think about how that money is allocated, it is up to the superintendent to say what it is that she needs. But from a board perspective, where we have been leaning in as our cycle has just started, it goes really from December to April, is what are you taking out to achieve the goal? Because that's where our accountability lies in making sure that those guardrails that we have set are actually being matched with where the dollars are allocated. Right? So 80% of the budget is salaries, right? Of course, and so, but where is it allocated? So, for example, if we say family engagement is a priority in order to help with literacy, but that budget has been cut, right? And so, how then? What is the plan to actually solve for that? So, we're really looking to understand what's not in the budget versus what is in the budget, because that's where really the story lies. And I would urge the parents, the community to come to those public budget hearings to ask the questions to make sure you understand, not only as a taxpayer, but also as a parent, because where your money is, that reflects your priorities. So what we say, if not matched with funding, there's a disconnect.
So let's walk through it then, given my time in doing this and, as you get into your role, so we have budget allocation, approving the budget, so let's just say now we've approved the budget and we move forward. So let's talk a little bit about how school boards keep the leadership accountable, right? Because I get the calls in the work that I do and say, well, this school is, as we call it in education, chronically underperforming. So over 3 years, we've been functioning at a D level or lower, right? So at what point do you hold leadership accountable, right, for improvement as a school board? Just looking at it from the school board side, what kind of discussions do school board members have at that point?
So the number one person we hold accountable is the superintendent.
Right.
And so it is our job to evaluate the superintendent every year. And so we set forth the goals like we talked about, and then every year we monitor progress towards those goals, and that's a direct correlation. Right. So that is the way in which we hold the superintendent accountable, because our number one job is to incent those adult behaviors to change, to accelerate student outcomes. Right. So if that progress is not happening, then that would be reflected in the evaluation, which is why it is important to have school board members that understand like performance management, leadership, and governance to be able to hold that accountability. Because we all know in whatever capacity that we're in, whatever our leadership is holding us accountable to, that's what we want to hit, because that's a direct reflection into what we're able to do in our own daily lives.
Right. So let's think about this. So let's back out and kind of look at a broader perspective across the country, right? We see various examples of unhealthy school board superintendent relationships. So let's think about, since we're solutions based on this podcast, what would you say a healthy school board superintendent relationship looks like when it comes to improving outcomes for struggling schools?
So I would say the first thing would be communication, right? And with mutual respect. And so the superintendent is an expert and practitioner. That board hired that person to do that role, but the board has accountability and expertise too. So I think there needs to be mutual respect and open communication where there's no surprises, that people are sharing information two-way. I think that's usually the first problem that you see. Then you have to have respect for the position and the roles. Like the superintendent needs to understand that the board is accountable to the community, and that is where we get put, our feet to the fire. Right. The board has to understand that the superintendent is accountable to her team. Right. And so if you understand and respect positions, then you also will understand in which ways you need to support the other person so that everybody can be successful. Because if everybody's focused on student outcomes, then we can all win. So I think it's communication and respect for the position. If you're a board member that really wants to be operational, then you really shouldn't be on the board. Right. Also, if you're a board member that just wants to protest all the time and not really govern and write policies, then you shouldn't be on the board. Right. And so I think that there's the nuances there.
Right. And that's an important point that you just raised, because we see so many examples across the country of school board members really want to do the superintendent role versus the school board members role. So when we think about this, I think there's a role for school board members to rebuild trust with communities, because we see far too many cases where the communities feel that the school board has let them down. So whether it's closing a school, in their neighborhood, taking resources away, to maybe a wealthier side of the school district. How can school board members or school boards as a whole rebuild trust with the communities that they serve when it comes to struggling schools?
Well, one thing that I have noticed and felt in my journey is that a lot of times it feels like school boards talk internally and are talking to educators and staff, but not actually to the community and specifically to parents, and making sure that the information is digestible, accessible. Even in my experience, it's like, well, it's on the website. Well, if no one knows that, then it's not transparent, right? And so I believe that if we can do both and not only talk internally, but do what we're doing right now is to talk externally, make sure people understand the roles, the why behind the decisions, what is the impact, and the show like the trade-offs. I think that's a really good first step, because there are actually way more parents and community leaders than there are internally, right? Like the community as a whole is invested in our schools. We have 186 schools. So I think that we've got to figure out how we start talking to and bringing people along the journey as the first step to build trust.
And one of the things you and I kind of talked about before that we don't see school board members do often, especially like after they're elected, is that like holding listening sessions, right, for stakeholders. And I think one of the things for you in your new role and the possibilities there, if we look at, kind of what your priorities are, and we are, let's just say we're giving recommendations to other school board members, how important do you feel those listening sessions could be for not only your success, but school members nationally for their success as well?
So I think thank you for bringing that up. So the listening sessions would be, I think, are huge because when you're on the campaign trail, right, you're listening and you're visible. And then after the campaign drops off, a lot of times people feel like they don't see you again until it's time to campaign again.
Exactly.
So I think that consistency of thinking about diverse groups of educators, parents, community leaders, churches, nonprofits, to make sure that you're actually hearing the impacts of your decisions, right? And so much of what you've taught me is that who is impacted most by this decision and how do you make sure their voices are heard? So I think the listening sessions are great. I think going out and spending time in schools, not as a board member that needs to be handled, but a board member that is serving. So that you can actually get in there, work carpool, go serve food and lunches, like go sit into, the staff room and help the teachers so that you can actually, again, stay closest to the people. So those are two things that I'm definitely going to try to do, as well as to look for opportunities like this to continue to communicate directly to communities and parents. And you have to think about where do people go get their information and go bring it to them and not expect people to come to you.
Right. And so before we wrap up, I have one major question to ask, and then we'll kind of talk to some of these stakeholders. So most school board members aren't, in a traditional sense, educators, right? And so based off of that, what do you see when you kind of examine nationally the type of training school boards need to function effectively in today's context with what we know about struggling schools?
So what I would say, I do think that the school board needs an educator voice.
Okay.
I love that Atlanta has a actual current educator on their school board that's been elected by their faculty to serve there. I think that is great. I think that voice does need to be represented. But I think in today's landscape, you need to have, just like any other board, a diverse group of skills. Right now, I would say artificial intelligence is huge as you think about not only how students learn and teachers teach, but also how that's going to transform the organization.
Right.
I think that there is a good amount of data because that's what is being consumed. You need somebody that understands finance. You need somebody that is probably, really good with communications. I think that if you have a diverse group of skills versus one prototype of a person, then just like what we ask for diversity inside of our schools, I think the school board should reflect that as well.
Yeah, that's important because when you look at that, like that Atlanta model, it could bring clarity to a lot of decisions at school boards, kind of think about that. So as we wrap up, let's talk about recommendations. Is there anything that you would like to share with school board members, district leaders, or communities that may be listening today on something that we may not have covered? What would you want to share with them?
The role of the school board is very different than probably what you think. And I hope that was conveyed here in this call, in this conversation that we're having now, because our role is to represent what's important and hold the superintendent accountable to doing it, not to do it for them.
Right.
And I believe the community is thinking that the school board member can do those things. And that shows that there's a lack of communication from the school board side on like what is the actual role and what is the actual power and autonomy that the school board has over the actual school system. So to me, that's the biggest aha that I have had and the biggest thing that I just want to drive home. The other thing that I would say is that every decision should focus on students. And you should challenge yourselves as a community and as a school board. Like, who is this decision for? And if it's not best for students, then why are we doing it? And why are we even talking about it?
Right. And when we look at that, I mean, all of those are powerful things that we have to consider. So before we wrap up, I want, if you can, tell us a little bit about your books, right? How can they follow your work? Give our audience a little bit, of information about your recently completed dissertation, and so they can know how to follow you and stay in alignment with the work that you're doing.
Thank you for that. So I have written 3 children's books, Black Boy Joy, Black Boy Joy Christmas Countdown, and Black Boy Joy Promoted to Big Brother. I'm working on my 4th one right now, so stay tuned, but really focused on how do we bring Black boys into everyday stories in our literature, and to give different conversations for families to have as they think about what it means to be, a diverse person in this community. Through that work, I have really focused on Black mothers and parenting, and what does that look like to navigate and educate and advocate in the education system. And so I have my website, which is charlittahatch.com, as well as my Instagram, where you can follow and learn more of how we could partner together. I love to come out to schools to do different author talks or different professional development sessions. So I look forward to continuing to connect with your school turnaround audience.
Great. Well, we were so honored to have you. For our audience, Dr. Hatch has been a presenter at our previous international conference on urban education. Hopefully she can continue to do that. This has sparked some ideas that I'll talk with her about for that particular conference. But I only try to bring guests on here that are difference makers and have the heart for school turnaround and uplifting our communities so our kids could have a great school to attend so they could reach their full potential. So thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.